Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the online conference, the challenge or multiple challenges for transatlantic partnerships. A very important and up-to-date topic, as there are many challenges that we could divide in three groups: economics, politics and security. And that's exactly what we are going to focus on.
Now let me mention new development. We are very much looking forward to cooperating with the new American administration, with the President Joe Biden and his team. Very important topic for the whole of Europe and the EU is the urgent need to improve our trade relationship. We should say goodbye to any attempts of threats of trade wars, and we should work hard to liberalize our mutual trade relationship. Perhaps we do not have to be as ambitious and comprehensive as abandoned treaty TTIP, but mutual trade and investments between the United States and Europe should start to flourish again. We are looking forward for the United States to come back on board to international agreements, first of all, the Paris Climate Accord. Czech Republic is ready to cooperate with the United States and Canada on the development and implementation of the new environmentally clean technologies and energy savings. However, by fulfilling very ambitious targets to lower the CO2 emissions, we should be very careful not to destroy the competitiveness of our industries, and we should be able to guarantee that big countries like India and China are also reducing emissions as they promised. But we are also looking forward to more active United States cooperation in the WTO and United Nations. We have a lot of room, not only Czech Republic, but also European Union, to improve scientific cooperation with the United States, exchange in research and development, education, and technological innovation. This is very important for me, not only due to challenges connected to the healthcare and the pandemic of COVID-19. Both of our continents, Europe and America, and all countries in these continents have a mutually connected and mutually mixed history. We share the same values, traditions, same principles. We believe in democracy, freedom, liberties, and human rights. We should not forget that together we are also stronger.
I mentioned the European Democracy Action Plan. We want to focus on elections integrity, strengthening freedom of expression, and tackling disinformation. As you can see, these three are the themes also relevant in our transatlantic communication and cooperation. I had an opportunity to discuss all three themes recently with Nancy Pelosi, and also key figures in the American Congress, important people from very significant think tanks in Washington, and also this big tech which come to operate on European territory from the United States. As for the Digital Services Act, which will be the regulation, it aims to update and complete our digital single market and protect citizens and consumers in doing so, in using the digital sphere in a safe and useful way. We have seen how the digital revolution has put private companies in position of great power but little responsibility. Online platforms that connect billions of people via social media, using and monetizing their private data, display content managed by algorithms, and connect businesses with a very large number of customers. Regulation of the digital economy is needed to clarify the responsibilities and ensure a responsible conduct. This is also an issue of interest to the United States, and one where we need to engage together. Another case in point is the rollout of 5G, where closer coordination between the European Union and the United States should be possible. These initiatives, the Action Plan, the Digital Services Act, the Data Economy Strategy, will set the general lines on the basis of which the Union will build also international partnerships in this field, including with the United States.
Russian economy, Russia, etc., will play an important part. So back to the transatlantic relationship, I think that here the importance will be placed on a continuation of accommodating monetary policy. Both the Federal Reserve Bank has gone very, very strongly trying to stimulate the American economy. The European Central Bank has followed and also is providing major monetary stimulus to the economy. But I think that the emphasis really has to be at this point on fiscal measures. Obviously, it's difficult given that the size of debt relative to GDP is quite high. And so in that sense, I think there are strong voices, more so in Europe, I would say, even than in the United States, that going further in terms of fiscal stimulus financed by increasing national debts in the various countries is dangerous. Nevertheless, the major European initiative, the plan for reconstruction and resilience, I think is a major step in the right direction. I also expect that the US Congress and the President will agree to a new package of fiscal stimulus. And so in that sense, I think both sides of the Atlantic will move forward. And the expectation is that unless the pandemic gets completely out of hand, that the European as well as the US economies will start growing next year. But I would expect that the rate of growth will be slower than was hoped originally. I see a scenario which will be somewhat similar to what we saw after the Great Recession 12 years ago, that the US economy probably is taking stronger steps than the European economy or economies within Europe, so that the rate of growth of GDP, I would expect, will be stronger in the United States than in Europe, which to me indicates that the Europeans should think very, very hard about actually taking important steps that it does pay.
More climate-friendly US president is a very promising thing for everyone, especially for us working on climate issues. However, it is also something that is combined with the EU's taxonomy coming into force in 2021, and we have new interest from the European Central Bank looking increasingly at what climate-related risks look. So all of this, in our view, is something that builds up to what we call a green momentum, when there's more funding than ever trying to reach low carbon initiatives. And since the US is such a large player in financial markets and its policies have outsized effects on the global economy, we do see this as a perfect green storm that is building up, at least in terms of policy, in terms of what financial actors will be looking at, what will be on their minds, what they will be worrying about. And as we say, follow the money. The money has a lot of power. We all want investments, especially with a coming recession, with people being worried about their jobs, thinking about how do we actually build more resilience in the system. The greening will be there. It has been on the agenda for a long time, but maybe something will start moving next year. Because even without a Democratic Senate, Joe Biden, the president-elect, can use a variety of institutions and appointments to advance the climate agenda. So it's not just the Paris Agreement or the coming up of the COP26 that we need to look at. We also need to look at, for example, the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US, which demands public companies to disclose information about their financial health. If the agency actually broadens these requirements to include more information about climate risk, that will be quite meaningful. In addition, Federal Reserve Board, whose aim is to support economic stability and growth, if they decide that climate change is a rising threat and start looking at it, that is also something that's quite impactful. In addition to that, you of course have Commodity Futures Trading Commission, you have Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, so you have a variety of institutions that can act within the system. And then, most importantly, it's also the banking system that is on the move. So the US Federal Reserve has announced that it will be joining the network for greening the financial system. This is a global network of central banks that are looking at climate-related risks. Joining the NGFS is a big deal. As we know, currently, the Czech Republic has not joined the network yet. We are quite hopeful that maybe that will change. In practice, it doesn't mean doing much about climate risk yet, but it is an important signaling that potentially you're starting to think about it. Because once regulators and banks start looking at climate-related risks more closely, this means that in the future, more sustainable companies might be able to take better advantage of lower borrowing costs. And in addition to that, they might have lower risk profile.
The negotiations and the problems related to it. So I have my doubts whether these people would easily now, say, agree on a new TTIP framework just because Joe Biden is the president. I mean, Obama also had a lot of support in left liberal circles in Europe, and still there was a lot of opposition. And I'm not sure whether this opposition can be overcome easily. And so this would be the last of my priorities. My first priority would be to, say, come to terms with respect to these tariffs we impose on each other, reduce them and use the threat level, and then to say organize a reform process of the multilateral arena. I think that is where the US and the EU can really make a difference and make a point. And this would then also, say, strengthen the relations and the position with respect to China.
I think the digital part is very important as well, but it can be some other topics in general. So I think also by sort of enhancing the economic dimension of transatlantic relations, we can actually provide the answers needed for the post-pandemic recovery. It's basically by boosting foreign trade.
Linda is nodding in accordance to many points what Andrej said. Linda, would you like to comment on that? Would you like to continue?
Thank you.
And Professor
I couldn't actually agree more with that. I do think that trade will be one of the major ways out of it. However, it will also be productive investment. So systematically tracking where we invest and how we invest would be a very good idea. Sadly, that is still underdeveloped in a lot of cases, and I think more work needs to happen. There is a lot of movement both in the US and in Europe to do that. So I think with a bigger post-pandemic push, this will come to some quite positive outcomes. Currently, we have much more interest that we have seen also from investors in the US looking at where they could invest in Europe, because they are quite interested in terms of what does the taxonomy mean, because that's another way of tracking investment. And how they see it is that actually tracking investment so that you can see where it goes, if you can minimize your climate risk, that's quite a positive outcome. Then if you add the social layer, that future-proofs it further. So I think there's going to be growing interest in that. I think Europe in certain regions is already very developed in terms of how they track investment. So I think it's going to be a very interesting time to watch how this happens, and especially with new technology that allows us to gather more data and analyze more data. I do think that there will be improvement in a lot of processes going forward.
But there is also a clear tendency that since China decided to go not to democratize itself and came with this system of artificial intelligence, through artificial intelligence following its citizens. And so we don't want these tendencies to be exported into Western countries, into European or to the US and other countries in the world. So there will be some unavoidable decoupling in sensitive technologies with China. On the other hand, we still be able to trade normally with China, but the scope of goods which would be considered strategic will definitely increase.
the escalating trade disputes, lowering our trade barriers, and working together on new technologies and regulatory standards and topics like 5G, civil use of nuclear energy, artificial intelligence, or cybersecurity provide a promising mix of not only positive agenda, but also of strategic cooperation. Without presuming too much, I believe that in the long term, our ambition can be even a renewed discussion on a broader trade agreement with the US. The Biden administration can also significantly contribute to the engagement of the US in the multilateral system. We need to work together towards the WTO modernization and on the issue of no-market economies.
We can expect that the new administration will change the style of US foreign policy. It might be more open to discuss with us not only issues of bilateral trade between EU and US, but also issues related to the overall multilateral system, issues Trump administration either avoided or opposed to, like international commitment on climate change. We expect that the Biden administration might consider joining Paris Agreement in order to meet its promises the Democrats did during the campaign.
Concept of burden sharing about Europe paying more for its own defense, that is going to still remain a part of the American agenda. In my conversations with the Americans not involved in the national security or foreign policy, many actually believe that American cares more than European to their own security. They believe that while Europe is more focused on the economic morass produced by the pandemic, but they wonder why the investment in foreign policy and assistance of a taxpayer money should go where they perceive the lack of ownership of that leadership coming from Europe. Belarus and especially Ukraine will remain highly on a President-elect Biden agenda. As you all know, there is a bipartisan congressional support for support to Ukraine. And when it comes to Russia, it's very hard to predict who will handle these issues. But what we're learning is that Putin's actions, such as poisoning of opposition leader Navalny and actions in Belarus and Ukraine, will heavily and permanently influence those decisions. Putin, I trust, would be more happy and willing to, with the Biden team, thinking he would be able to engage in the nuclear arms control. But then there is another caution to our allies in Europe. The price that Russia would most likely enact in any possible nuclear weapons cuts would be for the US to pull all the nuclear weapons out of the NATO. And once that happens, there is no coming back. You cannot bring those weapons back. Putin knows and hopes that he can generate support and positions among those Democrats, those nations who and political leaders in Europe who does not want nuclear weapons as a part of NATO strategic defense.
There might be still some differences when it comes to regional approach of European Union and US, especially maybe in the case of Middle East, where European countries promoted JCPOA, the nuclear agreement with Iran. The question here is whether Biden's administration will return back, promote a dialogue with Iran, or it will continue in the policy presented by Trump's administration, which was more confrontational and led to weakening of the JCPOA even though we understand that there are more issues not covered in the agreement, but still representing a concern for international community and countries in the region. So Middle East might be questionable whether EU and US will find a common ground. In many other areas, I think that with new administration, it will be easier to find common positions. I think that we can start with the expectation from Biden's ambition to strengthen the cooperation of like-minded countries within the multilateral system. President Biden would like to organize first summit of world democracies. We hope that this will be inclusive process that might strengthen the role of democratic states in UN, in UN agencies, and in many other global initiatives. The aim is to strengthen the voice of democracies in the world right now, because frankly, and it has been already said, we are increasingly facing a struggle of different narratives about the governance, and here I think that democracies need to stick together, need to work together, and need to improve international organizations we more or less established in the past.
And I think this is something which really characterized the expectations also on our side of the Atlantic. So what we really need is to get engaged again. What was missing in the past, where we all follow this Twitter diplomacy of Mr. Trump, where we were all just following his tweets, just trying to learn how much new tariffs we will get on our exports in the US. So this should be now taboo, and we will come back to the negotiating table, which is a good point. As for the content, I very much agree with what Mr. Minister Petříček said on the position of Biden's administration in the Middle East. I very much hope that we will see some shift when it comes to Iran, where Europe has been very, very active, and I think we all also remember the famous Obama speech in 2009 in Prague, where he actually started the call for a decrease of effective decrease of nuclear arms, and hopefully this will be valid also for the Biden's administration. For other topics, if I leave my favorite trade apart, definitely China, which I agree with Sasha. Well, I don't expect major shift in the U.S. policy, but here again, I think combined forces with the EU can bring more benefits both to the U.S. and to the EU. So I hope that we will perhaps engage together and face the challenges of China together. Of course, it will be also our internal task to make sure that we have one united EU front when it comes to our foreign policy vis-à-vis China. But I think this is one of the topic where one of the area where we can work together with the new administration.
I would be far from saying that NATO has become irrelevant, but it's fair to say that NATO is going through a continuous adaptation for years now. And Secretary General launched the initiative NATO 2030. He nominated a group of senior experts who are to identify recommendations for NATO further and deeper adaptation to face the requirements of new challenges. So I think NATO is on track when dealing with the current challenges. What I was trying to point to was kind of expansion of scope from exclusively political and military issues into those that affect very much our assessment of security environment. That means NATO should focus much more on receiving experts and discussing issues of energy, environment, climate, social issues, all of those affecting security in this very complex environment. That's one thing. The other is how to make cooperation and sharing between NATO and EU more effective, going far beyond these 74 agreed initiatives that are for years on the list of the two organizations. Coming to more practical, and I like the comment of Jeroen saying European pillar of NATO to being more visible and probably even institutionalized, because this is where I would see the way ahead for proper division of labor without doubling efforts in NATO and EU, trying to build similar or the same capabilities, but rather using those existing capabilities and create conditions for European pillar to act more independently within NATO, using all the capabilities and structures and provisions that are established and well proven. So we have some good ways to go, but obviously they need a lot of work.
And I think we haven't done enough to actually have member states agree on the priorities on that agenda. So really outlining what our key priorities are on tech, and then putting the authorities and the resources behind them to make that happen. I would say also, as we've all alluded to in the discussion so far, clearly the threats that are coming down the pike are more likely to be these kind of non-traditional soft security issues, if you will. So I think NATO's ability to enhance its crisis management capabilities so that we can respond to more things such as humanitarian crises and climate issues, building on its role in the coronavirus pandemic, whether that was the EADRCC or NATO's Support and Procurement Agency, all played really important roles. And I think that's something important to highlight, is where we have value to add as NATO is leveraging our military capabilities to actually tackle civil crises, and that link between even things like crisis mobility and military mobility, using our ability to move personnel and equipment across Europe quickly, is something for NATO to invest more in.